Part: The American Revolution, Origins, Struggles, and Enduring Legacy. Introduction. The American Revolution stands as a defining epoch that altered the course of history, emerging from decades of escalating colonial dissatisfaction with British imperial policies. The revolution evolved into a multifaceted conflict blending military engagements, ideological upheavals, and political innovation. It marked the birth of a nation grounded in principles of liberty, equality, and self-governance, and its legacy continues to influence democratic movements worldwide. Part 1: The Origins. Deep roots of discontent and revolutionary beginnings, colonial identity, and British imperial authority. The 13 British colonies along North America's eastern seaboard each developed distinctive social, economic, and political identities during the 17th and early 18th centuries. Colonists enjoyed considerable self-governance through elected assemblies, locally appointed governors, and communal institutions like town meetings. However, ultimate authority rested with the British Crown and Parliament, which imposed mercantilist policies aimed at enriching the mother country. Following the costly Qiannian-Zhanzheng 7 Years' War, 1756-1763, known in its North American theater as the Fa-Yin-Zhanzheng French and Indian War, Britain sought to recoup debts through taxation schemes that increasingly infringed on colonial autonomy. Taxation sparks Resistance Stamp Act 1765. The first direct tax imposed on the colonies required colonists to purchase stamped paper for legal documents, newspapers, and playing cards. This ignited widespread protests articulated by the slogan, "No taxation without representation," uniting merchants, lawyers, printers, and ordinary citizens in coordinated boycotts that ultimately compelled Parliament to repeal the act. Townshend Acts de 1767, taxes on common imports such as glass, paint, and tea, reignited colonial resistance. Committees of correspondence formed to coordinate boycotts and political opposition, signaling rising intercolonial cooperation. Boston Tea Party, 1773. Radical protesters, disguised as Native Americans, dumped tons of taxed tea into Boston Harbor to repudiate the Tea Act and assert colonial autonomy. British retaliation through the punitive, coercive, or intolerable acts in 1774 further galvanized colonial unity, provoking the First Continental Congress's call for resistance. Outbreak of armed conflict, Lexington and Concord. The spark turned into open warfare on April 19, 1775, when British troops marched to seize colonial arms in Concord, Massachusetts. Colonial militias, known as Minutemen, ambushed the troops at Lexington and Concord, marking the Revolution's onset. The British siege of Boston ensued, setting the stage for a prolonged conflict. Intellectual and military leadership. George Washington's appointment as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army provided steady military leadership throughout the war's challenges. Intellectual pioneers such as Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin shaped the Revolution's ideological underpinning and diplomatic success, with Jefferson's drafting of the Declaration of Independence becoming a foundational document. The American Revolution, Origins, Struggles, and Enduring Legacy. Introduction. The American Revolution is one of the most transformative and pivotal events in global history. It marked the rise of new ideas about governance, liberty, and human rights that challenged centuries-old monarchies and colonial empires. This revolution was not simply a military conflict. It was a profound political, social, and ideological upheaval that culminated in the founding of the United States of America, a nation conceived in principles of freedom, equality, and republicanism. Its legacy has influenced democratic aspirations worldwide and continues to shape the discourse around liberty and justice today. Part 1: The Origins. Deep Roots of Discontent and Revolutionary Beginnings, Colonial Identity, and British Imperial Authority. By the mid-18th century, the 13 British colonies stretching from New England to the southern coast had distinct economic bases, cultures, and political institutions. Colonial assemblies governed much of internal affairs, but sovereignty ultimately resided with the English crown and parliament. The British Empire operated on mercantile principles designed to ensure colonies contributed to the mother country's wealth and power. Colonial trade was tightly regulated by the Navigation Acts, which restricted commerce to English ships and markets. The aftermath of the French and Indian War, 1756 to 1763, part of the larger 7 Years' War, expanded British territorial claims in North America, but left Britain burdened with massive war debts. The British government, looking to colonies for financial recovery, began imposing new taxes and stricter enforcement on trade. Taxation sparks resistance. The Stamp Act, 1765. The Stamp Act introduced the first direct internal tax on the colonies, applying to all legal documents, newspapers, and playing cards. It provoked widespread outrage among colonists who believed such taxation without their representation in Parliament was unconstitutional. Resistance united colonists across social classes. As merchants, printers, lawyers, and farmers organized boycotts and protests, the Sons of Liberty, a radical group, orchestrated public demonstrations and intimidation against collectors of the tax. Ultimately, the act was repealed in 1766, but tensions remained high. The Townshend Acts, 1767, seeking alternative revenue, Parliament imposed import duties on goods like glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea. These taxes rekindled colonial opposition. Non-importation agreements spread, and colonial patriotism surged. Committees of correspondence were formed to coordinate resistance and share information, laying groundwork for intercolonial cooperation. The Boston Tea Party, 1773, the Tea Act, allowing the British East India Company to undercut colonial merchants by selling directly to consumers with a tax, ignited fierce opposition. Patriots disguised as Mohawk Indians boarded ships in Boston Harbor and dumped 342 chests of tea overboard. This dramatic act of defiance symbolized colonial rejection of British fiscal policies and threatened British authority. The Intolerable Acts, 1774, and colonial unity. In response, Parliament passed the Coercive Acts, or Intolerable Acts, aimed at punishing Massachusetts and suppressing resistance. The Boston Port Act closed the harbor. The Massachusetts Government Act curtailed self-rule. The Administration of Justice Act protected British officials. And the Quartering Act required housing for British troops. Far from quelling dissent, these laws galvanized colonial unity. In Philadelphia, the First Continental Congress convened in September 1774, representing 12 colonies. It coordinated economic boycotts and emphasized colonial rights, setting the stage for greater resistance. The outbreak of armed conflict, Lexington and Concord, 1775. On April 19, 1775, British troops marched to seize colonial arms in Concord, Massachusetts. Colonial militias known as Minutemen confronted the troops in skirmishes at Lexington and Concord. The confrontation marked the Revolution's outbreak. The British retreat was harassed by militias using guerrilla tactics, now embedded in American warfare. The subsequent British siege of Boston led to months of military tension and political ferment. Influential figures and ideologies. George Washington, chosen as commander-in-chief by the Second Continental Congress, is George Washington's, Composed leadership, patience, and strategic insight were crucial to sustaining the colonial war effort. His ability to maintain discipline and morale in the Continental Army through trials and retreats forged the foundation for ultimate victory. Intellectual leaders, Jefferson, Adams, Franklin, Thomas Jefferson authored the Declaration of Independence, articulating Enlightenment ideals of unalienable rights, popular sovereignty, and the social contract that justified revolution. John Adams was a passionate advocate for independence in Congress and helped forge alliances, including with France. Benjamin Franklin skillfully negotiated French support, securing critical military and financial aid.